Welcome, 6th graders, to this explainer. Today, we're exploring the absolutely fascinating roots of Indian culture. I'm so excited to be your guide as we act as true knowledge seekers. We're going to take a journey back in time, literally thousands of years, to uncover the incredible ideas, texts, and traditions that helped shape the vibrant, super diverse country of India. Forget about those dry textbook pages, right? Today, we're bringing history to life.
Okay, so let's just dive right into this beautiful ancient quote. It's called a subhashita, which basically means a wise saying. Just think about this for a second. That which cannot be stolen, that which, though it is used, only grows every day. What could that possibly be? I mean, money runs out, right? Toys break. But true knowledge? Now that is the absolute greatest wealth you can possess. The more you use it, the more you share it, the bigger it grows. And honestly, that relentless quest for knowledge is exactly what ancient Indian culture was built upon.
So, here's our quick roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to explore the roots of our culture, the Vedas and Vedic society, the Upanishads and shared values, the emergence of Buddhism and Jainism, folk and tribal traditions, and then we'll wrap it all up with a fun chapter recap and quiz. Let's get into it.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the roots of our culture, the ancient tree.
You know, we can visualize Indian culture not just as a boring list of facts, but as a living, breathing thing. Think of it like a giant, ancient tree that stood strong for thousands of years. The deep, deep roots, well, those represent the ancient Indus or Harappan civilization. And those roots nurture this massive, solid trunk, which represents the core, shared values running through all of Indian history. Then, from this one common trunk, hundreds of beautiful, totally diverse branches grow out. These branches are the different schools of thought, like groups of spiritual seekers, artists, scientists, and philosophers who might have totally different ideas, but they all share that exact same unified foundation.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Vedas and Vedic society, ancient wisdom.
So our first major branch of knowledge here is the Vedas. But a really crucial thing to remember is that when we talk about the Vedas, we aren't just talking about dusty old books. We are literally talking about ancient systems of knowledge. In fact, the word Veda comes from the Sanskrit root vid, which actually means knowledge. It's just like the word vidya. And these systems were composed by super wise seers called rishis, who were men, and rishikas, who were women.
Now there are 4 Vedas in total: the Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva. The Rig Veda is the oldest, dating all the way back between the 5th and 2nd millennium BCE. But here's the truly mind-blowing part about this. They weren't even written down at first. No way. These thousands of hymns were memorized and passed down entirely by mouth for, get this, 100 to 200 generations. Just imagine having to perfectly memorize thousands of poems. That oral training was so incredibly rigorous that in 2008, UNESCO actually recognized Vedic chanting as a masterpiece of human heritage.
To really understand their world, we need to see how they lived. Early Vedic society wasn't just, isolated wandering individuals. They were highly organized into clans called janas, like the Bharatas and the Purus. And for governance, sure, they had a raja, or a king. But they also gathered in these assemblies called the Sabha and Samiti, which were basically early forms of collective decision-making. Plus, their daily lives looked a lot like a modern town. They had all sorts of diverse professions: weavers, potters, builders, healers, and priests. Just everyday people doing everyday jobs.
When the Vedic people looked up at the stars, they saw what we call the cosmos. They viewed it as this beautifully ordered and harmonious system. And they believed the whole universe was held together by something called ritam, which basically translates to truth and order. So they would compose these beautiful hymns to deities like Agni, the fire god, and Indra, believing that these deities helped sustain this universal truth. But ultimately, they recognized an even deeper unity behind it all. As one really famous hymn says, "Truth is one, but sages give it many names."
And that leads us perfectly into Section 3, Upanishads and shared values, a deeper connection. Building on the foundation of the Vedas, right around 1000 BCE, a new group of texts emerged called the Upanishads. And these texts, they ask massive, universe-sized questions about who we really are. They introduce 2 huge ideas. First, Brahman, which is the divine energy or essence of the entire universe. And second, Atman, which is your own inner spirit or self. Now, the truly mind-blowing teaching of the Upanishads is that your Atman and the universe's Brahman are completely connected. It's beautifully captured in the Sanskrit phrase aham brahmasmi, which means I am divine, and tat twamasi, meaning you are that. Basically, you aren't separate from the universe, you're fundamentally a part of it. Because they believed everything is so deeply connected, these texts also introduced concepts that are still incredibly important in India today. Concepts like karma, meaning our actions have direct results, rebirth, which is the cycle of taking birth again, and the practice of yoga to help realize this deep consciousness. This was all driven by this intense curiosity. Actually, there's this great famous story of a student named Shvetaketu. He kind of thought he knew everything, but his father taught him to ask much deeper questions about the universe, and it all leads back to this really beautiful prayer they left us. Sarve bhavantu sukhina, may all creatures be happy and free from sorrow.
Next up is Section 4, Buddhism and Jainism, Emergence, New Branches Grow. So, while the ideas of the Upanishads were still forming, some other incredible seekers stepped forward. Let's look at how this builds chronologically. We start with the oral Vedic texts around 1500 BCE. Then, by 1000 BCE, the Upanishads introduce all those new philosophical depths we just talked about. And then, jumping to around 500 BCE, we see this massive burst of new thought with the births of two major historical figures who actually started entirely new traditions that didn't rely on the Vedas at all.
These two iconic figures were Siddhartha Gautama, who founded Buddhism, and Vardhamana Mahavira, a key figure in Jainism. And what's absolutely amazing here is their similarities. They were both young princes. Siddhartha was born in Lumbini, while Vardhamana was born near Vaishali in modern-day Bihar. Yet both of them chose to just walk away from their super comfortable royal lives to seek out true spiritual knowledge. It really shows how this intense hunger for truth was spreading like wildfire across ancient India.
Just consider Mahavira's intense journey for a moment. At the age of 30, he completely walked away from all his wealth. For 12 long years, he practiced incredibly strict ascetic discipline. Basically, that means living a life of extreme simplicity and deep meditation. Finally, after all that, he achieved infinite knowledge and became known as Mahavira, meaning the great hero. It just goes to show the literal, absolute dedication these ancient seekers had.
But here is the most beautiful part of this whole story. Even though Buddhism, Jainism, and the Vedic traditions all had different practices and definitely didn't always agree with each other, they all grew from the exact same cultural trunk. They shared a deep core belief in dharma, which means duty or righteousness, as well as karma, rebirth, and the ultimate goal of finding a way to end human suffering and ignorance. They're different branches, sure, but they belong to the exact same tree.
All right, Section 5, Folk and Tribal Traditions, the Oral Roots.
Now hold on a second, because formal written texts or strictly memorized hymns aren't the only ways culture survives. Not even close. Everyday people and totally diverse tribes all across the Indian subcontinent have passed down their own incredibly rich traditions. These are our folk and tribal roots. Without relying on formal written texts, everyday common folks preserve their values, their art, and their wisdom through stories, songs, and daily practices passed down from parents to children, often just sitting right around the hearth. And you know what? These oral traditions are every bit as essential to the roots of our cultural tree as the grand famous texts.
And that brings us to Section 6, Chapter Recap and Quiz. Test your knowledge.
Okay, my focused learners, it is time for a rapid-fire chapter revision to see exactly what you remember. Question 1. Think all the way back to the very beginning of our explainer when we talked about those 100 to 200 generations of rishis and rishikas passing down hymns purely through oral memory. Which international organization officially recognized this incredible feat back in 2008? Got your guess?
Excellent job if you said UNESCO. That's the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. Remembering that really shows how globally important this ancient Indian knowledge still is today, literally thousands of years later. All right, let's try one more quick one. Remember the quote we started with today? That subhashita about the absolute greatest wealth you could ever possibly possess in this world? Well, what does the ancient Sanskrit root word vid actually mean, which gives us the word Veda? You got it. It means knowledge. Vidya, Veda, it's all about that relentless quest for knowledge. You guys absolutely nailed it. As we officially wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final big question to ponder. You know, you are the newest generation growing on this ancient, thousands of years old tree. So as a young seeker of truth today, how will you use your wealth of knowledge to grow a brand new branch on the tree of human culture? Something to think about, right? Keep seeking, keep questioning, and never ever stop learning. I'll catch you next time.